Please drop a like and comment your own story. And join us as we explore the internet's craziest glitch stories. Story 1. This is more of a story than just a single incident or encounter. Still have no idea what happened to this day. I still remember it all clearly, but haven't ever bothered to tell many people, because it's both long and not many would believe my anyways. It all started during a vacation to Alabama. We were staying near the border of the Florida-Alabama coast, and our hotel was just on the beach. The beach was pretty nice, not perfectly clear water, but it still wasn't dirty and was virtually empty, except for a couple other people in our hotel. It also was a very small town too. Not many people, traffic, not a single school, or many modern buildings. None except the new Costco, right across the street of our hotel. It was the night before we were scheduled to leave, and was around 12-ish at night, and it was fully dark, except for the moonlight. We were only planning to stay the following morning and drive back, so we were basically about to leave to drive back home, and I didn't have anything to do. I basically said screw it, and walked across the dark, unlit street to the brand new Costco. I'd planned to maybe grab a drink or some candies to take with me. The hotel parking lot was big, along with the Costco parking lot, with just a very short crosswalk going between them. I wasn't even entirely sure it was open, but as I got closer I saw all the lights on. The parking lot walk toward the Costco was really quiet, with only crickets chirping. Even when I was about 5 feet away from the open entrance, it was completely quiet. I still wasn't sure if it was open or not. It looked somewhat like this, except later at night, so much darker and less lit, and minus all the people or cars. Right then was when the weirdness started. The exact moment I had stepped foot inside the Costco, it erupted in noise. It was absolutely full of people, clerks, sales associates, even children shopping around with their parents. The only thing I could compare it to is like in a video game when you enter a new area, and you see everything being loaded/rendered in. It wasn't like the noise had slowly gotten louder, or the volume worked its way up as I was walking inside. It just suddenly and very abruptly started when I had entered. Also, Costco is basically always wide open, and the doors are just open garage doors, so there is no actual barrier to the sound. I reckon there had to be at least 100 people in there, including workers and whole families, but the parking lot was virtually empty, with like 6 or 7 cars. Again, it was 12 at night. I was so confused when I had entered, I almost thought I was mistaken, and maybe it was morning, and the sun was about to rise. I looked back over my shoulder outside again only the moon. It was definitely nighttime. The weird, confusing, and just generally bizarre things hit me over and over again. The next very weird thing I had noticed was the behavior of the people. It looked normal at first, but then it was almost too normal. Again, it was the middle of night, and there was small children shopping with their parents in a small beach town, like nothing was off about it. After walking around for a bit, I also noticed the staff was acting really strange. The first red flag was this worker or janitor. He was mopping the same exact piece of floor over and over and over. It was definitely spotless and clean, but he would mop it for about 20 seconds in an exact and perfect circular motion, dump his mop in the water, and do the exact same thing again. He did not pause, stop, cough, or move at all. Just the same exact piece of floor and same spot. It was almost like you took a video of yourself mopping, and you replayed it over and over with a perfect loop. Maybe even like a GIF playing over and over. After a while, I just knew something was off. It was just too perfect. And that's when I thought I had knew what was happening. It was a movie set. It had to be considering how perfect everything was, and how some people were behaving like a movie extra. But I looked around for a camera, some film set, director, anything pertaining to movies, and saw nothing. Never heard any directions or seen any people acting in a scene. Just normal shoppers. So I shut down that idea and kept thinking. I grabbed some candy and put it in the front pocket of my hoodie to pay for it before I left, and kept walking around looking for other things. The next strange thing I noticed was that nobody seemed to acknowledge I existed. You know how when you're shopping you might just make eye contact with someone, maybe say, "Excuse me," as walking by, or a sales associate might approach you to ask if you need help. Didn't get any of that. Even as I, a then alone 14-year-old, was walking around in the busy store at night, I didn't think anybody even glanced at me once. I had walked over toward the back side of the store, near the fire exit doors. Finally, a man who worked there had approached me. He was a very token-looking black man. Yes, I know that word isn't nice, but it's the most fitting. He had a perfect hairline, perfect white and shiny teeth, perfectly tucked in shirt, perfectly shined shoes, and his clothes seemed to fit him perfectly again, like out of some drug prescription commercial or college pamphlet. He asked me just how can I help you, and did a very large wide grin, and just waited for a response, still smiling the entire time. I just instinctively responded, "I'm just looking," and he said, "Sure thing, feel free to tell me if you need any help." And right after he did a complete 180 and walked straight out of the building. It was like a fire exit door, but it led to nothing as the parking lot was in the front. The door just closed after him, and I didn't really care to go check where he had went. I looked around, and nobody had seemed to care or pay attention to how he just randomly left out the back door. So, after that, I was thinking whether or not I should go, or try to figure out what's going on in this place. Almost just after I thought that, another worker approached me. He just walked straight up to me and said, "I think it's time to check out," in a very stern and direct way, and then also did another wide smile. It almost felt more like he was saying, "You need to leave right now," based on his tone. So of course I finally decided to leave. I went across the street and went back to the hotel. So, after waking up next morning, just to check again, I asked my dad if he wanted to go across the street to the Costco to get some food. He replied, "What Costco?" Looked outside the window, absolutely nothing there. He told me I must have been dreaming, but I swore I wasn't. First, I hardly remember any of my dreams to begin with, and I've never confused one with reality. Second, I just knew I wasn't asleep. You can just feel it. Just like I know I'm awake now. Third, and the weirdest thing, I remembered I'd accidentally left the store without paying for the Tic Tacs I grabbed earlier. I checked my front hoodie pocket, and there they were, full and unopened. Easily the weirdest, most confusing, and unexplainable thing that's ever happened to me. Story 2. Best friend ever and love of my life who'd apparently never existed. Even as I write this, I'm crying. The feelings of regret and loss are so intense and profound despite the fact that this apparently non-existent boy was only in my life for maybe 2 or 3 months over 43 years ago, when I was somewhere between 10 and 12. I'm 55 now. How could I miss someone so much with such deep sorrow and pain that I'm racked with sobs as I'm writing this account about someone who was never real? I have even questioned my sexual orientation over my memories of my relationship with this boy. I thought perhaps I'm gay or bisexual, but I found that I am only powerfully emotionally attracted to males who look exactly like this boy at various ages, and ordinary feelings of friendship toward men or boys who look different from this. I have no interest in gay sex, even with someone who looks like that. However, I do have to admit I have a strong tendency toward being homoromantic because of my history with this boy. A very strange corollary to this is the fact that I never had a classmate in any of my schools I ever attended from kindergarten all of the way through graduate school who looked even closely like this. I had seen boys, teens, and men who looked like this under circumstances where we could never meet, such as driving the opposite way, other school yearbooks from the past, on television, etc., but nobody I ever got to meet in person and could actually get to know. So these memories and the emotions accompanying them are not based on a past experience with someone in real life who looked like this. I recently asked my mother, turned 85 in November 2017, if I had ever had a friend who looked like my very special and intimate friend, and she assured me I had never had a friend who looked like that after I described him to her. I have only had sexual intimacy with my wife, now ex, and nobody else in my whole life. It was difficult for me to make and keep friends because of my then undiagnosed mild autistic spectrum disorder, so I was very attached to the few friends I did have. During that time I had 2 close friends, a real one named David, and the mystery boy I'm about to describe. I was never into imaginary friends, as I have always been too logical for that. The best I could come up with back when we were all younger, like 5 to 7 years old, were superhero characters my sister, friends, and I could turn into using the transforming machine. They had names like Underground Boy or Tree Boy and never regular kid names. Even when attempting to make up an imaginary friend on purpose, I failed to do so out of boredom, since I could never feel anything for what I knew wasn't real to begin with. That alone made my experience all the more mysterious. Turns out I had only one close friend in reality during the summer of 1972, David. David B. had curly black hair he generally preferred to keep short and was a bit overweight like me, so no resemblance to this kid at all. This was about 1974, or more likely 1972, but whatever the year, we only knew each other for 2 or maybe 3 months over the summer, and it was the first era in modern times where boys frequently had long hair, often about shoulder length. My wonderful friend had shoulder-length straight blonde hair with bangs cut across his forehead, so his beautifully shaped eyebrows were clearly visible after I convinced him they weren't ugly, and that he didn't need to hide them behind his bangs. See the black and white photo of a whole similar-looking kid below to see how he used to wear his bangs when he tried to hide his eyebrows. The hairstyle was called a pageboy cut. I remember how I loved the sharp contrast between his blonde scalp hair and his very dark brown or black thick eyebrows and long lashes. I found the picture below online somewhere maybe a year ago of a boy, likely taken between 2000 to 2010 because of his cell phone and earbuds, who bore a strong resemblance to my very special friend when he had his bangs long enough to hide his eyebrows. The hairstyle is completely correct as I remembered it on my friend, except my friend's hair was a bit smoother and thicker, and the center part very straight and well-defined. I modified his face to widen his mouth and also darken what I could see of his eyebrows to make him look more like my friend. Notice that this boy's arms and legs are hairy to begin with. This was apparent in the original picture, and I left it alone. This shows it's possible for somebody in real life to look like this. I have to admit, when I first saw the picture below, I was shocked, and within seconds my heart was pounding as I felt chills of recognition go up and down my spine. For a moment I thought I had actually found him. He had ended up somewhere in Europe for some reason. Then I noticed, with a rather unpleasant feeling of being let down with a resounding thud inside, replacing my mixture of thrills of finding him and my totally inappropriate, it turned out, rising anger toward my friends and family for pretending he had never existed when in fact he had, with a depressed, dull ache inside, the relatively modern earbuds and cell phone, and other subtle features such as his eyebrows not being dark enough and his mouth being too narrow, but still between his hairy arms and legs, his slender build, and his hairstyle. This Italian kid sure looked almost exactly like a slightly older Scot, enough to fool me for several seconds. The fact that the picture was black and white, and his swim trunks were exactly the same style he wore when we went swimming together, also fooled me into thinking it could have been from the 1970s. My grandfather used AB/W camera all through the 70s. In the picture, you will see a full-resolution version of the image where his arm and leg hair is obvious. I remember how wonderfully he sang. I remember telling him he sounded much better than the boys in Almost Angels, the Disney movie about the Vienna Boys Choir. Of course we watched it on a 1969 Magnavox TV, so the sound wasn't exactly the best, and how we shared a common love of science and chickens. He named his chickens like my other friend David and I did. I also recall how I loved to stroke his arm hair, eyebrows, and run my fingers through his long scalp hair from head to the tops of his shoulders. He made these sweet, happy, almost purring moans, non-sexual, just cute little happy sounds, whenever I stroked his hair, and he always smiled. I enjoyed holding him in long hugs and cherished our cuddling, and his sweet and endearing habit of casually resting one of his skinny legs over the top of my fatter thigh closest to him, so his foot and lower leg would hang between mine most of the time. He'd sit down beside me on the couch, a picnic table bench, adjacent chairs, or just around the corner of a table at which we were both seated. I loved the sensation of his leg resting on mine, and missed the wonderful feeling of him doing it to this day. While I stroked or otherwise enjoyed his abundant hair on his legs, arms, face, or scalp, he'd play with my hair too, and liked the fact mine was wavy. We'd often sit leaning up against each other when in private, both of us holding some of my chickens and petting them while we talked about many things seemingly for hours. Occasionally, we'd give each other quick kisses on the lips or each other's cheeks, but nothing with the tongue that I can remember. Such was our sweet, innocent love. We didn't know what gay was, we just knew we were blissfully happy together. Then suddenly he was gone. He was much more than just simply gone. He had been deleted, erased, or obliterated along with all evidence he had ever existed. I don't know the exact date or even month of him vanishing for good, but I do remember the day I casually asked my mother about him, and if he could come over to spend the day with me near the end of the summer of 1974. 1972 seems more likely the more I think about it, and she acted confused like she'd never seen or even heard of him before. I was totally bewildered and told her what he looked like, his name, his parents' names, etc. I also reminded her about the stuff we'd done together over the past year at our house with us. She told me over and over with obviously increasing annoyance that she had never seen any boy who'd looked like that ever come over to visit me, nor me ever mentioning anyone like him before that day. In order to prove to my mother he was real, I tried to call him, but I got the same annoyed stranger several times in a row when I carefully dialed and redialed his parents' phone number I had memorized. After the third attempt and getting the same increasingly irritated, "You still have the wrong number," response from the party that answered each of my calls, my mother wouldn't let me dial that number again, and firmly told me to stop playing with the phone. She was really annoyed at that point and accused me of making all of this up, and then became really nervous as I started to plead with her while crying to believe me, and she told me point blank to stop that crazy talk right now. She said this because over and over again with increasing distress and tears I insisted he was real, and I wasn't making him up, even to the point I was screaming over and over that he was real. I kept on asking over and over between sobs, "Why won't you believe me? I'm not lying." She was pretty upset at that point and told me to go to my room and not come back downstairs until I had my head back on straight. I was positively howling while crying all the more because was so hurt and confused by what my mom was doing. I thought that she was pretending he wasn't real for some unknowable reason to punish me for something. My mother had never been that cruel to me before. Turned out she wasn't cruel at all, but instead was only rightfully worried that I was hallucinating rather than the intentional confabulation she had first accused me of doing. As for my memories, some of which I desperately recounted to her during my hysterical and vain efforts to convince her that Scott was real and not someone I had made up, I clearly remembered him swimming with me in my family pool on several occasions and doing stuff with me in my family creeks, walnut dryer building, and rock quarry area, our cuddling and him singing to me, and most importantly how he told me he loved me, and how I told him over and over how much I loved him too. However, in the days following neither of my parents, when I asked Dad later, my sister, nor my other close, no cuddling, friend David could remember him at all. I could have sworn my mother had taken several pictures of me and him doing activities with my family, and remember looking at pictures just brought home from drugstore, where we'd get our film developed showing him using the ring swing at my family picnic area, going to the beach, swimming at Morton's Resort and the Petaluma Municipal Pool, several of him in our pool, and my favorite one of him having a snack of walnuts from my parents' trees. We were cracking ourselves with my sister Amy and me while all three of us were seated at the kitchen table at my parents' house. It was easy to see below the table since there was no tablecloth and the chairs were thin. While we were sitting in separate chairs and not in physical contact above the waist, I remember seeing in the picture that he actually had his legs spread out and his left leg was resting on top of my right thigh, so his lower leg and foot were hanging between my legs. My sister was to my left on the same side of the table I was on, and Scott to my right around the end of the table, so he was at a right angle to me. I missed that picture more than any other one showing both of us, since it was so ordinary and everyday, yet subtly intimate and sweet at the same time. I thought if I got out all of the photos of Scott and other stuff he'd given to me or made for me, I could convince my mother he was real. In a growing panic, I thoroughly searched through all of the pictures in all of our photo albums, envelopes, and boxes, and could not find a single one of him. When I couldn't find any evidence he ever existed, none of the pictures we had drawn together, pieces of petrified wood he had found, stuff he had made for me, notes and cards he had written for me, etc. I became totally hysterical with grief and despair, and I couldn't stop crying so far as I can remember. Within days I actually became truly seriously depressed for the first time in my life, sometimes crying all day for several weeks, and hardly eating or doing anything at all outside my home. My parents had to take me to see some counselors, psychologists, and a couple of psychiatrists for evaluation, since I was so upset over missing someone who wasn't real to them. After spending a lot of time over the next month with counselors, I began to believe perhaps he hadn't been real after all, and was actually feeling better, but then I found proof that he had really existed, at least temporarily. I already thought like a scientist, and came up with an idea to test if my memories of him finding several very difficult to locate pieces of petrified wood in my family's Orchard Ranch Larger Lower Creek were real or not. If they weren't, I wouldn't find anything where he had supposedly found a piece, and go on with my life and fully accept what the psychologists and counselors had been telling me, that somehow my special friend was merely a figment of a vivid imagination, a complex hallucination, or a vivid dream, and somehow I had gotten the idea that he and his world was real. If, on the other hand, I recently have become familiar with the term gaslighting. In retrospect, without knowing the term itself, I came to believe that everyone I knew had conspired in an ultimate gaslighting operation, with the assistance of those dedicated counselors, psychiatrists, and psychologists' intensive sessions, to convince me all my recalled experiences with Scott were hallucinations or confabulations and weren't real. No wonder I got a total emotional breakdown after making the discovery I'm about to describe. The proof that made me convinced that he was real despite the counselors' and psychologists' assurances otherwise was because when I went into the lower creek at my parents' place to the places where I had watched my special friend locate several pieces of the very rare and difficult to see, and thus find pale tan, sand and similar-looking sandstone, also tan, petrified wood randomly scattered in the dry gravel over the past year, I found all of the ones I'd seen Scott actually find in the exact same obscure spots where I had watched him pick them up out of the creek gravel, still in place, undisturbed as if nobody had ever found them before. I even recovered 2 from deep within poison oak bushes with a long walnut tree shaking pole. I was and still am severely allergic to the urushiol and poison oak, so I could not have planted those specimens myself. I would likely have had to have taken to the hospital for emergency treatment within hours if I had entered either bush. So somehow I actually remembered where he had found them. Probably the very last memory I remember before my nervous breakdown was one of me tightly gripping one of the pieces. I think it was either the 3rd or 4th one I'd found in less than 5 minutes of running from site to site and immediately locating the specimens. So hard I was hurting my hands, sobbing my eyes out, tears dripping all over its tan surface, knowing what my ease in finding it and the others had meant. Scott had been real, and not only had he been ripped out of my life, everyone I knew, and I thought loved me, was lying to me about him not ever being real. I must have carried the petrified wood and the aluminum shaking pole back to the house, since I later found 5 of the pieces scattered around my bedroom on the floor, separate from the rest of my other more organized rock collection, and my parents never missed the walnut tree shaking pole, but I don't remember doing any of this. I don't remember anything for several months after that, full account in comments, see all comments part, due to me having an apparently inexplicable nervous breakdown according to my mother. The psychiatrist and counselors were at a total loss according to records. I read letters and notes about their findings years later, as to why I was behaving like a boy who'd experienced an extremely traumatic event, specifically a loss of someone even closer to me than my family or friends, in a perfectly normal family with no history of such an event. I was certainly not acting like a kid who had merely decided to let go of the idea of an imaginary friend. I suddenly, back in 1972 or so, came to the conclusion that nobody loved me and had all agreed to lie to me to hurt me for some reason about Scott and obfuscate the true explanation for his disappearance. I even imagined that people were put under duress by some authority to deny my friend's existence or else. My father had top-secret clearance both in the Army and later in civil service for his work on nuclear submarines, and had told me prison or even death could result from divulging certain classified information. I knew this when I was 10. I had, therefore, reason to suspect something classified had happened to Scott and his family. Somehow this authority was so convincing and frightening that even kids like my 8-year-old sister, 9-year-old best friend, and even younger cousins were coerced into complete silence about Scott. Even in old age with moderate dementia, my father never divulged any top-secret information he knew, and took it to the grave June 10, 2017, when he died at age 84. Something had made him so afraid to even tell me anything about classified technology in secret. He never did, even when he was convinced for a few weeks it was 1973, when it was really 2016. Since nobody was willing to break the supposed conspiracy of silence, I concluded that people kept the truth of what really happened to Scott to themselves purely out of self-interest, and that I was judged by all as unworthy and unlovable to the point that nobody was ever willing to put themselves at risk to try to help me deal with my devastating loss by telling me even a little bit of the truth, even in secret. Then on top of it, their task was to convince me that the deep, intimate love and friendship with someone who felt absolutely real to me had never happened. Gaslighting? I think the reader can understand that if a vulnerable and grieving 10-year-old boy came to that sort of cynical view of people who should have been supportive and weren't, a nervous breakdown would have been pretty much on par for the course. At the time, of course, the idea that I had been a visitor to a parallel matrix and had subsequently returned to my home, one had never occurred to me. Story 3. This one was absolutely nuts. One of those experiences that sit in your memory like a grain of sand under the skin, impossible to ignore. It started off completely normal. My wife and I went to visit my dad on a Saturday afternoon. It was one of those lazy, golden days where nothing feels urgent. We went out for a late lunch, the 3 of us sitting by the window at that little diner off Main Street. She ordered her usual, eggs and toast, even though it was 3 in the afternoon, and my dad cracked his usual dad jokes about breakfast for dinner being a sign of chaos. We laughed. Everything was easy, familiar. Afterward, we went back to his place, had coffee in those chipped mugs he's had since I was a kid, and ended up watching Poop Cruise on Netflix. A terrible documentary we all somehow got invested in. We laughed until we cried. It was the kind of simple, perfect day that makes you feel grounded. Later, my wife and I went home, poured a couple drinks, and ended the night in the best way possible. Just the two of us, close and warm and happy. The next morning, I woke up thinking that was nice. A good memory to tuck away. A few days later, I mentioned it to her in passing, something small like, "That was a great day at Dad's, huh?" And she blinked at me, confused. "What day?" she asked. I laughed, thinking she was teasing, but she looked genuinely lost. She had no recollection of any of it. Not lunch, not the coffee, not the movie, not the evening afterward. Nothing. Now, I'll admit, my wife's a bit of a stoner. She's got that mellow, forgetful vibe sometimes, but her memory only really fogs up when she's high. And that day, she hadn't smoked a thing. I was sure of it. Still, I figured maybe I was the one misremembering something, so I texted my dad, discreetly like, "Hey, that was a great afternoon the other day, lunch, Poop Cruise, coffee." He texted back almost immediately, "What are you talking about?" At that point I actually laughed out loud. Maybe I'd dreamed it. Maybe I'd had one of those weird, ultra-vivid mushroom dreams. I had taken some shrooms and a gummy a few nights before that, followed by a good shot of scotch. Maybe my brain just stitched everything together, like a rerun of my life, but scrambled and mixed with fiction. Except 2 weeks later, we went to visit my dad again. Same lazy Saturday energy. Same diner. She ordered eggs and toast again. My dad made the same joke. And as it was happening, I realized, my stomach dropping like a stone, this was it. This was that day. Word for word. Gesture for gesture. I could feel each moment before it happened, like the world was running on a script I'd already read. I tried to change something, anything. When the waitress asked if we wanted refills, I said no, even though I remembered saying yes before. But she smiled and said, "You sure? You usually say yes," and poured the coffee anyway. Every attempt I made to veer off course got corrected, like the world had bumpers keeping me in line. Later, we sat down for coffee, watched Poop Cruise, and even laughed at the exact same jokes. I remember the same crack in the mug handle, the same faint smell of my dad's aftershave, the same flicker of the TV when the power blinked for half a second. And then we went home. And the evening unfolded exactly the same. It wasn't déjà vu. It was like a film reel looping, and I was inside it, aware but powerless to stop it. Every word, every motion was perfectly replayed. I remember thinking, what if this is it? What if I'm stuck here now, repeating the same warm little afternoon forever? Story 4. I'm not sure if this is exactly what you are meaning, but I will give it a go. Several years ago, I was working for a fairly large retailer. They were situated in an old building. They had been there for a few decades, I believe. There were 4 main floors, stories, 2 customer floors, a colleague and admin floor, and a warehouse on the top floor. The glitch appeared on the admin floor in one of the less-used corridors. One end of the corridor was the main admin and colleague areas, the main lift, elevator, and staircase, staff room and toilets. On the other end of the corridor was a seldom-used lift that took you to the back of the sales floor. It wasn't as big as the main lift and didn't really have much use unless the other one was broken or in use, as you would have to walk all around the corridors to get to anywhere useful. The only thing in the corridor itself was a plant room. A room containing all the air conditioning, heating, and electrical equipment, and just used to store unusual fixtures and fittings that didn't get used often. So the corridor wasn't used that much. It wasn't well lit, but not so dim you couldn't see anything. Here comes the glitch, and it's hard to describe. Walking past one specific point, I would see. Well, that's the question. I don't know exactly. If you are a gamer, you will likely have seen something like it while playing a game. You know when an object or element doesn't appear quite right, or where a character or object spawns somewhere it shouldn't. You often get a blur or a line in the wrong place. It will only appear when looking at it from a certain angle or from a certain place. Well, this was exactly like that. Every time I walked past this one spot on the corridor, I would see what I can only describe as a line, near the wall but not on the wall, in the air as if it was attached to the roof with an invisible fitting. A perfectly straight line. It looked like maybe about 5 or 6 centimeters long. It would catch my eye every time I walked past. Always in exactly the same place, It would always catch my eye in the same spot, about a foot away, I guess. I would examine the spot and look for it, but could never see it up close, whatever it was. I examined the walls and ceiling, looking for some explanation, a crack in a tile or something that would reflect the light or, well, anything to explain it. I thought it might be a spider's web dangling down, that would explain why it appeared to be hovering in the air, but it wouldn't explain why it was exactly straight, or why it was still there years later. I tried looking at it from a different angle. I tried walking down the corridor in the opposite direction, and it didn't appear. I tried it up close, far away, higher, lower, but nothing. I tried purposefully trying not to look as I walked past, but it would always catch my eye. Every time. I asked other people if they had seen anything, but nobody had. It really was like a graphics glitch in a video game, and it only appeared to me. And it drove me mad with curiosity. Story 5. I've never had anything like this happen to me before, and honestly, it's been sitting in the back of my mind ever since. It started out like any other night. I had just gotten out of the shower, steam still hanging in the air, the mirror fogged over except for the streak I'd wiped clear with my hand. I was going through my usual bedtime routine, moisturizer, serum, a little bit of under-eye cream. That's when I noticed a new pimple had formed on my chin. Small, red, annoying. The kind that just appears out of nowhere, mocking you in the mirror. So I grabbed my little sleeve of pimple patches. The sleeve is thin, kind of papery, with those small, clear stickers inside. I peeled one off, stuck it over the pimple, and admired my work. Problem solved. I went to slide the sleeve back into its pouch, but it slipped from my fingers. I remember watching it fall. Slowly. Like in a movie when time slows down for no reason. The sleeve didn't just drop straight down. It swayed from side to side, floating a little, the way a leaf drifts down from a tree in autumn. I watched it the whole way down, eyes tracking it as it made its gentle descent toward the open drawer of my bathroom counter. And then it vanished. Not like it bounced or fell behind something. I mean, it disappeared. 1 second it was there mid-fall, inches above the drawer that holds all my skincare stuff, jars, serums, little bottles. And the next second, it was just gone. Like someone had turned off the frame of reality it existed in. I froze mid-motion, hands still half extended as if I could somehow catch it. My brain scrambled to make sense of what I'd just seen. I must have blinked, right? Maybe it slid behind a bottle. Maybe it got stuck in the folds of the drawer. Something normal. So I started searching. I pulled open the drawer fully and emptied it out onto the counter. Every jar, every bottle, every tiny tube of cream, nothing. I even shook the drawer a little, thinking maybe it had somehow gotten wedged behind the wood or under the base. Still nothing. Then I checked the floor. My bathroom isn't very big, so it didn't take long. I looked under the little rug in front of the sink, behind the trash can, even in the trash can, just in case it somehow bounced off something and landed inside. I crouched down, checked the corners, the shadows, the space behind the door, nothing. It wasn't anywhere. I even stepped back and tried to replay it in my head, standing exactly where I'd been. The angle, the distance from the drawer, the way it fell. I kept thinking maybe I'd missed it, that it had landed somewhere weird. But it didn't make sense. I saw it vanish in midair. There was no sound, no flicker, no gust of air, just gone. After about 10 minutes of searching, I gave up and just stood there in silence. The bathroom was quiet except for the faint hum of the vent. Everything looked completely normal, which somehow made it worse. Like the universe had casually erased one small, meaningless thing just to mess with me. The next day I checked again, because of course I did. I opened that same drawer, half expecting the sleeve to be sitting right on top of everything like it had been there all along. But no, still gone. I even looked around my bedroom, in case I'd somehow carried it out with me, even though I knew I hadn't. It's such a small, stupid thing, a sleeve of pimple patches, but it's been haunting me. Things don't just disappear. They don't blink out of existence while you're watching. I keep thinking maybe I was overtired, or my brain glitched for a second, or I somehow imagined it. But then I remember the way it fell, slow, deliberate, swaying side to side, and the way it just stopped being there. Now every time I drop something, I watch it a little too closely, half expecting it to vanish again. So far, nothing else has. But I can't shake the feeling that somewhere, in the small cracks between seconds, there's a tiny pouch holding my missing pimple patches. Proof that something isn't quite right with the world.